Who am I?
Richard Kazimer, media veteran.
Why I got in radio is because I'm good with a knife.
Contributor in Perth, Australia.
Our friend Richard Kazimer in the United States.
How are you guys enjoying the 19th century? Is that working out for you? How can you say, I'm not making fun of you as a race, I'm making fun of you as black performers?
I think as a country, Americans are as patriotic as the most rabid UK football hooligan.
Who am I?
Richard S. Kazimer. We won't be saying his mission should he choose to accept it. He's already chosen to accept it. Our friend Richard Kazimer from the United States joins us again this morning. Morning, Richard.
Good morning. Do I have a choice?
No.
I expect.
But thank you for asking. I mean, we go through the motions of saying, do I have the choice? Of course you don't. Don't for a moment think you have a choice. Hey, something that we're going to look at this week, which I think is something quite interesting because it buzzes around from time to time, is the issue of the legal drinking age. And something that's become apparent to me, as much as anything, believe it or not, through various different news articles that have popped up from time to time when some famous young celebrities have got themselves in trouble. The name Lindsay Lohan comes to mind, and that is good old-fashioned drinking. But I believe, and if I'm not mistaken, in all 50 states in the United States, the legal age remains at 21.
That is correct. In 1984, the National Minimum Drinking Age Act went into effect. That raised everything up to 21 in all the states.
Prior to that act, how many states were at 18?
It fluctuated. This all goes back to when Prohibition was repealed, when we could actually start drinking again and making alcohol. It was at 21, and then when the age of majority was put down to 18, when 18-year-olds were allowed to vote, then a lot of states followed suit that they lowered the drinking age to 18. But it was during the 70s and 80s where states started to voluntarily raise their ages up to 19, 20, or 21. And then in 84, it became uniform. Now, when the president at the time imposed that act, the president didn't have the authority to actually demand that all states go to 21, but you can offer the states an offer they can't refuse by stipulating that if the state didn't go up to 21 for the legal drinking age, that they would lose 10% of their highway funding. And you can imagine how many highways there are in every state, that represented a large chunk of money. So nobody really challenged it, and since that time, pretty much all the states have been at 21 for quite a while.
Yeah, I was going to say, obviously no successive president at any time has sought to change that. The general consensus in your country about it being 21, I mean, if you suggested, and I noted here that I found an article that actually went back to February that suggested that then Prime Minister Rudd said that he personally would like the drinking age to be raised to 21 in Australia. It was something that I've talked about before. I suspect in this country it's not something that would receive widespread support. What has been the general view in the United States? I mean, obviously people in the United States must be aware that there are other countries where the drinking age is legal, and I dare say people who go on holidays from countries like this sometimes might run into trouble in the United States because you might have a 19 or 20-year-old who doesn't realise that they're not legally able to drink when they go to the US. But generally speaking, what sort of support does it have?
There are factions on both sides. There are proponents and opponents of reducing the age back to 18 or to 19. There doesn't seem to be a lot of push for that. There is a group called the Amethyst Initiative, or actually an organization started by a professor named John McCardle, who was founder of an organization called Choose Responsibly. He's also a professor at Middlebury College in Middlebury, Vermont. Now, what Professor McCardle has done is he's gone around to get chancellors and presidents of various universities to sign on to actually reduce the legal age to 18 from 21 because of the controversy about binge drinking on university campuses, which is a huge problem. The theory being, what McCardle is proposing is if you have responsible adults, 18-year-old to 21, drinking on their own daily, going to a bar or purchasing their own liquor and consuming it at their leisure, as opposed to waiting for the weekends to come and then consuming massive quantities of alcohol and then suffering from alcohol poisoning, sexual abuse, violent attacks, death, you name it, that would then lower that sort of binge drinking. Now, the other school of thought is that he's really not a proponent of that what he's actually doing is getting these college administrators and presidents to actually publicly sign on this in support of it to kind of hold them accountable, because these are notorious party schools where the administration looks the other way to keep these kids there. There is that school of thought that that's what he's doing, is to bring this to the forefront, the issue of about binge drinking so that these colleges no longer turn a blind eye to it and say, well, that's just part of youthful indiscretion. I honestly don't see a huge push to reduce the age back to 18 or 19. The only people who would ever benefit from that would be the liquor industry, who are already heavily marketing to the under 21 age crowd. But it really doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You're not going to see any doctors. You're not going to see any law enforcement push this. So it's only the liquor industry that would be pushing for this.
How much of a problem then is underage drinking? I mean, taking on board everything you've just said, I get the impression that one of the byproducts of having what is, I think by world standards, a fairly high minimum age for drinking, that underage drinking is obviously a big issue in the United States.
It is a big issue, and anytime you see a fluctuation or an adjustment in liberties such as drinking, you do see spikes. Obviously, if you lowered the age to 18, you would see less arrest of underage drinking, because minimum age was 21, and then you lowered it to 18, you would not be arresting anyone from 18 to 20 anymore. But what you would see is a spike in injuries, deaths, abuse, violence, and things like that. So now, do we risk that collateral damage until that levels off? What price do you put on a human life by selling more alcohol to supposedly responsible adults? The other thing, too, is once you've lowered that age, now the people who are below the age of 21 that are getting alcohol are getting it from people who are 21 and older. If you then reduce the age to 18, then you're going to start seeing people who are 17 and younger getting their alcohol from people who are 18 and 19 years old. And again, do you want to risk that occurrence and all the consequences that go with that?
I suppose that's always been the question that's been asked, and obviously over the years I guess the decision has been made that no, that's not the case. Well, what about the argument, and it's certainly one of the arguments that's presented here whenever it comes up for a debate, that you have a situation where somebody at 18 can vote, somebody at 18 can go to war, but they can't decide whether they do or don't drink in the case of the United States. Does that sometimes seem a bit critical? Like, I can send you to Iraq and get you shot, but God forbid if you go down to the liquor store and try and buy a carton of Budweiser, you'll get arrested.
That just doesn't wash, because if you're old enough to vote and old enough to die of the country, you should be old enough to drink. Granted, but men and women who join the armed forces at 18, now they sign up for 4 years. They have fewer personal rights and freedoms during that 4-year military hitch than civilians of the same age have, because when you join the military, you're told when to get up, what to eat, what to do, and what or what not to drink. Especially in bases, because we're in Iraq and in Afghanistan, is that those are Muslim countries. Alcohol is not even permitted on any U.S. base in those countries. So you're told that you cannot drink until you leave that country, your tour of duty. So where's the rationale? It just doesn't make any sense. U.S. military bases in general do not serve alcohol to enlistees, especially if you're under the age of 21. So if you're going in at 18 or 19, you're not going to get alcohol at a U.S. base, even if you're stationed here in the United States anyway. So it really doesn't hold water.
What happens for people, say, for example, when they go on shore leave in countries like Australia? I mean, if, for example, the U.S. fleet, as it does from time to time, calls into Fremantle, and people go on their R&R, if you're 19 or 18 and you jump off one of the US ships, you most certainly can drink here.
Well, yes, you can, but that's your country. That's not here. The law about 21 being the minimum age here in the United States, there's kind of a gray area where if you're under the age of 21 and you're drinking at home, if you're drinking with family, if you're drinking for a religious purpose, or this is part of your job, well, although I don't know what job would require an 18-year-old to drink alcohol, but if you're drinking at a family event or a religious event, that's okay. However, if you're a high school kid or a college kid and you show up at a party at somebody's house and there's alcohol, once you've left the premises and you get into trouble or you get pulled over, all bets are off. But again, if you're out of the country and you're drinking in Australia or anywhere on the globe, that's that country's responsibility. That U.S. military person, once they go back onto the ship, for example, and they happen to be blitzed, they're going to have to deal with their commanding officer. So there's no getting around it.
Mate, well, actually, there is a reason. I can tell you that's one of the reasons, I guess, why whenever they come in here, every motel room is booked out. Well, I mean, there might be two reasons for that, but one of the reasons might be also the fact that you got a chance to sabre up before you go back to the ship.
It's a business, and it's been around as old as fermentation.
One of the reasons why I asked about the effectiveness and all that sort of stuff is because I suppose in some ways, and I had a look at all the different legal ages around the place, and basically the United States is fairly old by world standards in terms of the minimum age for drinking. Is there an argument to a certain extent in a twisted sort of way to say this is almost like a legacy of prohibition? You sort of never really got past the fact that prohibition didn't work, so you sort of still try and keep some sort of regulation to a greater extent than most other countries do in the world?
No, I think it has everything to do with safety. I think it has everything to do with the value of life. We have seen too many generations, especially when it comes to highway safety and auto safety, where the industry dictated what we would put in cars to make them safe and not. And now we're not about to have the alcohol industry, the spirits industry dictate what is fashionable and what we should do as far as legal responsibility is concerned. There are just far too many people who are going into the emergency rooms in the morgue that are under the age of 21 because of alcohol. It remains a huge problem here, and I don't think this country is ever going to go back. We have restrictions where actually there are counties, even though a state may have their legal drinking age at 21, there are actual counties that don't even sell alcohol. There was a time where you couldn't even go into a restaurant that served alcohol if you were under the age of 21. If you couldn't go into a bar, but then if that bar became a restaurant as well, then you could go in. But there were dry communities. There still are dry communities within this country. So I don't think that smoke is going to go back in the bottle anytime soon.
Yeah, well, that's actually interesting, because from an observer from the other side of the world, it sort of seems to me that you seem to be very concerned about potential effects that alcohol might have on young people. Yet, as far as I can ascertain, as a 18 or 19-year-old, I could walk into Walmart and buy myself a gun.
That varies from state to state as well. And no, you can't. Gun purchasing is not as easy as perhaps you think it is or that we make it out to be. Massachusetts has a very strict gun law. I can go to New Hampshire or to Maine and buy a gun, but once they look at my license that I live in Massachusetts, they will refuse to sell me that gun. So no, you cannot buy a gun as easily as you can buy alcohol illegally. If an 18-year-old or 20-year-old has a phony ID, a phony driver's license with an older birth date on it, that's a lot different than buying a handgun.
So you don't see a parallel between the two? Because I know when you sit on this side of the world, it seems to me that you seem to be really concerned about people drinking, but not really concerned about how many guns people have.
That's apples and oranges. We can certainly discuss this at another time.
Oh, yeah, we certainly will. But, I mean, I was just sort of looking at the comparison between the two because, I mean, clearly it seems to me that you're looking at a regulation that has been in place because obviously they believe that people between 18 and 21 are incapable of making a rational decision in terms of alcohol consumption and their ability to control their alcohol consumption. Yet at the same age group could legally own a gun in most states of the United States, as far as I can see.
It could fall under the Constitution, the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms.
Yeah, I suppose you don't have a right to have alcohol, do you? But you do have a right to bear arms.
Alcohol is not protected under the Constitution, whereas gun ownership is. And as I say, it does vary from state to state. Alcohol is a consumable item. It does fall under the jurisdiction of the ATF, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearm Agency.
Yep.
But it is not something that you can actually kill somebody with intentionally.
When we have a look at this, I suppose one of the other questions that we have to ask in relation to alcohol, and once again, I imagine this does vary from state to state, or perhaps even from county to county. Regulations in terms of policing, like a lot of laws are often only as effective as they're policed. And as I said before, I would imagine this does vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But overall, how heavily policed are the regulations? And are there some places where they tend to overlook it a bit, where it's not so rigidly policed, whereas others might be more rigidly policed?
I can't speak for every state. I would imagine that some of the coastal communities, Florida, for example, areas where there's a lot of college spring break partying, and they kind of turn a blind eye. They know the kids are going to be down there just for a week drinking, whether they're underage or not. That's just par for the course. They let the police and the emergency people handle it. But as far as store owners and bar owners and restaurant owners are concerned, they're looking at the loss of their liquor license. Consider the markup of how much money you can make off a single bottle of alcohol by charging $4 or $5 for a drink from a bottle you may pay $12 for. You're looking at a substantial loss of income if you lose your license. So a smart store owner, a smart pub owner, and a restaurateur is going to police themselves. And that's why you'll actually see some liquor stores that even if you're 21, they won't sell you alcohol unless you prove that you're 25 or 30. They're policing themselves, and as I say, they stand to lose a lot. You see a lot more arrest of parents who are supplying their high school kids with alcohol for parties. There's a lot of progressive-minded parents that may think that, well, would rather have our kids having a party and drinking at our house as opposed to being on the road. Well, once those kids leave your premises and start staggering down the street or fall in the ditch and freeze to death, those adults are held accountable, and there have been some arrests and convictions because of that. More public awareness and more professional awareness is going a long way to hopefully curb the drinking problem of underage teens.
Now, bearing in mind that many people, certainly in this country between 18 and 21, go to licensed premises like pubs or nightclubs and things like that, accepting that a lot of those places, obviously for that age group in the US, is off limits, what do people do for entertainment between that 18 and 21 age group?
They do whatever we did. There are chem-free clubs that these kids can go to. There's any number of things to do, but if it's illegal, I think kids are going to do it. They're going to find their substance and their fun wherever they can find it, whether it's legal or not.
I was going to say, in other words, you're suggesting to me that the laws probably have limited effectiveness.
They do, as would our parents telling us what to do and what not to do. The community tries to do what it can, but unless it generates money, it's really difficult for a business owner to open a chem-free nightclub. There are large communities that do it. There are some cities that do it. Me being at my age, I don't get out and do that sort of stuff, so I don't know really what's available. Colleges certainly try to do it. Universities try to steer kids away from drinking as a means of recreation. There's any number of things to do. It's just having the incentive to go out there and do it. And then that gets back to a reason why you wouldn't want to lower the age to 18. Because if you're so bored between the ages of 18 and 21 that you have to rely on getting your fun out of a bottle, then why would the state or the country give you permission to go and have access to it whenever you want? Somebody has to look out for these youth, and if it's the government, then so be it. It seems to be working.
All right, as always, my friend, I do appreciate your time. By the way, if you wish to be Richard's friend on Facebook, Richard S. Kazimer is what you need to look for, and the surname is spelled Kazimer. Richard S. Kazimer, if you'd like to be Richard's friend on Facebook. He's always in the market for friends. In the meantime, my friend, you and I shall have a chat again next week. Thank you for your time.
All right, brother.